How about some scat, you little twat? As an interesting topic, I thought, hey, I haven't done Lua stuff in a while. How about we make a basic training mode? For this example, we're going to use Real Bout Fatal Fury 2, because me and a friend have been playing this game a lot recently. I know on Fightcade there already is a training mode, but I thought it would be interesting to just go through the very, very basics of how a training mode works. Obviously, this won't be as in-depth as an actual training mode, right? There won't be hitbox display or, you know, input reading, because honestly, shit like that is just kind of, it takes longer, for lack of a better description. So this is like how you get a basic-ass training mode. You should be able to do this for pretty much any arcade game. So before we actually do anything, we're going to make the script right quick. Of course, since the script has nothing in it, it won't inherently do anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to do double minus in order to write a comment. And then we're going to write macros. So macros are essentially shorthand, right? So how do I put this? So you know how you say lol or laugh out loud, right? Lol means laugh out loud. Like if you say lol, we get what you mean, right? You've said an abbreviated thing, but it still means the thing. You know what I'm saying? So in this case, we're going to say WB, WW, WD, and then we're going to do the same thing, but for read byte, read word, and read double. So this is useful for later on, for instance, when we want the characters to have infinite health, right? Because that's essentially what we're doing. We're taking their memory address of the health, and we're forcing the maximum health all the time, right? So they just can't die. These are the exact same thing, but instead of returning a byte, which is this, it returns a word, which is 2 bytes, or a D word, which of course is 2 words. Okay, so we have all our macros set up, so that's lovely. But now what do we actually, do? There are definitely better ways of doing this, but for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to do this. While true, do emulation, frame advance, end. So all this does is it constantly runs what's between these 2 points over and over and over again. If you've seen any of my other ROM hacking videos, you know how to set up a batch file with your MAME version and whatnot. But just in case you don't know, it's very simple. All you do is you make a BAT file and you have it say start MAME and then whatever version of MAME you have. For instance, this one is MAME RR. .exe. So it looks for that specific program. Okay, cool, we got that. And it gives it the value of Real Bout Fatal Fury 2, so we know to load this game, and then we can set additional flags. So for instance, no CPU, no, it's like no fucking, yeah, it's like no audio CPU. You can set the refresh rate, fucking, just a bunch of shit. But the only one we really care about is debug. So \debug. In order to just play the game normally, we could just click on this window and then press F5. I pressed F6 by accident. We can press F5. There we go. And the game will run totally normally. No weirdness at all. So right here, I go through the entirety of the process in getting the values needed for the timers and players' health and all that jazz, but I'm gonna be honest, if you've seen the other videos, you know what's happening. You know what's going on, so I'm not gonna repeat the shit here. Just watch the other videos, please. Please. Please, for the love of... Say UID equals... So if we look at the code again, we can see D0, and it's loaded into the address 8B A4. So A4 plus 8B. Right? So if we look at our cheat, we could see the memory address that player 1's health is at 1000 for 8B. And if we look, A4 is 100,400 plus 8B. That's our health address. So, player 1's unit ID is 0x00, because it's only 3 bytes, 100, 400. That's player 1. The reason that we're doing it like this, with these brackets and whatnot, is so we can have a bunch of values in them and reference them later in the code. Like, for instance, we can say UID dot player 1. So whatever the value here is, we could just chuck it in there, right? It just makes sense. So data equals health equals 0x 8e. Also going to make a little comment here, just saying it's a byte, just to be safe. So we can actually ascertain where player 2's one is, because we could see player 2's is 105 AB, HB, I mean. So it's literally the same as player 2's, just plus 100. So we could just say this. But in case you're lazy and you don't want to figure that out, we can also say space equals UID player 2 minus UID player 1. So whatever the distance between these two players is, how much data each one takes up, it'll just automatically calculate it. We don't need to remember it off by heart. You know, we can just say space and it's perfectly fine. So in order to get player 1's health, we say UID player 1 plus data dot health, right, equals health address in RAM. This is how the game would see it, but it's also helpful to understand this when programming in Lua, because we can use this to make things a little easier on ourselves. We know all that jazz. Now we just need to find the super meter for one of the characters. If we find it for one of them, we know it for both of them, because we can just say the offset here, right? So say the offset is, I don't know, D2, right? So the offset is D2 plus whatever the unit ID is. So we just need to find it for one player, and we have it for both. We're almost there. We're almost at the cool bit, I promise. I mean, I hope you find this bit cool. I mean, I do. But, you know, Oh, that's weird. So BC seems to be the actual meter. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to display player 1's meter physically. So we'll say player 1 meter equals read byte, what memory address, UID player 1 plus data dot meter. So whatever the current value in ROM is, we could just grab it from here. Say GUI dot text, we'll say 10, 20, string dot format. So essentially, whatever we put into here, into these brackets, we can format it to display it as something else. So for instance, I can say P1, you could give it a string, P1 meter, then we say percent, and then here, depending on what we give it, we could display it as different things. So we could say, well, why did I do that? We could say D to display it as a decimal, but what we want is X as a hexadecimal. And then here, we give it an actual value to format. So player 1 meter. While we're here, we might as well ensure that the players can't die. So we'll say function. So what we're doing here is I represents how many players there are. So I equals 0. We do it until it reaches 1, and we increment it by 1 every time. So we start at 0. So what we're going to do, write byte UID dot player 1 plus, we'll say space multiplied by I. So when we read the first player, of course the value is 0. So space is 0. Space multiplied by 0 is 0, I mean. So it'll just read from player 1's data, and then when we read from player 2's data, it'll say player 1's unit ID plus space, which is the distance between the two players in RAM. So in this case, it's 100. So player 2 would be player 1's unit ID plus 100, so 100, 500 there. And then we say plus data dot health. And we write the value. We know what the maximum value is because we found that earlier. We know the max value of health is C0. So we write the value. We're going to say max equals health equals 0. The reason for this is just so if we ever want to use this code somewhere else, it's easier to make it adjustable, you know? So if, say, Darkstalkers has a different value, we could just say that here, just adjust the code here, boom. Players equals 2. So there's 2 players, we'll say starts at 0. Max players minus 1. All right. Health. And we write the value max dot health. So we're constantly asserting C0 into whatever the players are right now. It doesn't inherently do anything because we haven't actually called the function anywhere. What we need to do is we actually have to say do this function, infinite health. This little parentheses, these are parameters. You can pass in stuff to this. Anyway, so what this does is it performs this loop and it passes in the value of I into infinite health. And then whatever's in infinite health, it takes that parameter. In this case, it replaces it with P. So I is P functionally, right? So for the first loop, I equals 0. So we pass in the value of 0. So since these parameters line up, P equals 0 when we first run it. Right byte, blah, 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 space multiplied by P. So this should actually cause both of our players to have infinite health. It seems I was a silly bastard and I had it running here twice for some reason. And then we run the game. Look at that. Both characters have infinite health. So this is where finding where those instructions write the timers into RAM can be kind of useful, right? Because if we look at title timer, it's 33B. If we look at character select timer, 094B. And if we look at infinite time, it's 6,000. So we can grab these and go back to max. We can just plop them in. So for instance, the timer equals 6,000. But we specifically have to say 0x 6,000. Because otherwise it'll read it as a decimal, and we don't want that. So our select timer equals 0x94b. And so we can have a separate function for this. We can say function freeze timers. Okay, I got distracted, but anyways, here's what I did. So I reformatted how this works a little bit. I put the maximum timers into their own table, and they're specifically the numbers, right? For a very simple reason. Down here, we have this little loop that says in pairs timer address, timer length equals timer length plus 1. Then we convert that into a number. All this does is it basically increments through the timer address table, and it returns a value indicating its length. So 1, 2, 3, right? There's 3 values. After this process, it returns the value of 3. So we can have as many or few values in here, and it will work, you know? And we do a similar thing for timer max. We don't actually count how many are here because we don't need to know. But if we look in freeze timers, I equals 1, timer length 1. So I begins at 1, And it continues this loop until it reaches the value of timer length, so 3. So it starts at 1. Write word timer address, then we return the index I from that table and timer max I from that table. So if we go back, it returns the title timer address, and then if we look at timer max and its first value, 30 free B. So we write the value of 30 free B to the title timer address in RAM. We do the same for character select, and we do the same for timer. Right? So with this line of code, we do all 3 of those timers at once, is the idea. We can see the maximum value is free C. So if we go back here, we can say max meter equals 0x free C. All we need to do is replace this with meter, and we're done. Or not. So now if we play this again, the meters are now completely topped, and they never go down. I think how this game handles like S power and H power and P power or whatever, I think that might be a separate thing. I'm not entirely sure, if I'm honest. So that is the absolute bare bones basic of how you implement a training mode in an arcade fighting game. Of course, you can be more extravagant, like you can learn how hitboxes work, or, you know, where inputs are read from, stuff like buffers and all that shit. But, you know, we're not going to cover that today, because that's quite an involved thing. But anyway, I hope you found this interesting, and have a good day.